afternoon. Thanks for joining us. We have a presentation today with EV Nickel, which just listed last Friday on the TSXV under the ticker EVNI. With me today, I have CEO Samson, who's going to walk us through the story. As always, there will be a Q&A section at the end, so feel free to input your Q&A in the Q&A box at the bottom of your screen. And also, as always, this presentation will contain forward-looking statements. If you'd like to have a look at those, you can find them on the company's presentation on their website. And with that out of the way, I'd like to introduce Sean. Sean, thanks for joining us.
Great to be here. Thanks for having me, Deb.
Yeah, so exciting times. You finally got your listing done. Looking forward to hearing the story. Maybe if you want to start with a little bit about yourself and your background and then get right into the pitch.
Sure. Thanks very much. So I'll be running through the slides as I flip through, and then we'll get to the Q&A. And these slides are available on the company's website as well. So some background on me. I run EV Nickel. EV Nickel came out of Rogue Resources, which is another junior mining company. This was a non-core asset with Rogue, and I'll walk you through the details of how the genesis of EV Nickel. But my background is I've been running Rogue for the past 5 years, and now I'm running both companies. And prior to that, I've been in the mining space for 15 years, began that at Kinross Gold. And then after 5 years of helping run that company, got into the juniors. Before that, my background is quite varied. I used to work in private equity, and prior to that, I started out my life in capital markets in New York as an equity trader. So as a Canadian, I came back to Canada and found myself in mining, and now I'm building up this nickel junior, which is a really exciting play on the EV nickel boom. So as Deb mentioned, we have our disclaimer. This was just cut down from 2 slides during our IPO. Where we had teams of lawyers working on all of our language down to 1 slide, very exciting. You can get into more details by looking at it on our website. So to summarize what EV Nickel is, we acquired 100% of a project in Timmins called the Langmuir Nickel Project. We bought that from Rogue Resources, which is also listed on the venture. Langmuir includes W4, which has an historic resource on it. At 1% nickel, we have 15 million pounds in the ground. That's of the class 1 nickel sulfide. It's on a huge land position. So we have over 9,000 hectares to explore, and we've identified across that package of over 30 kilometers of additional strike length. So it's a huge piece of land, and it's very exciting in terms of the initial mineralization that's been found with this starter resource. Now, where we're located is 30 kilometers southeast of Timmins. So it's a great place to be. There's a road, year-round road right down. All of our employees, they live and sleep in Timmins. So it's basically like a suburban mine, or will be a suburban mine. It's really well located in terms of, you look at North America, as the Detroit car companies are getting more into the electric vehicles, more and more of the demand is North American based with the EV batteries. And of course, being in Canada, as we say here, is we have the most streamlined permitting, as especially if we were to compare that to Indonesia, the Philippines, other parts of the world where nickel is prevalent. So we're really excited as to where we are. Nickel and the fundamentals, and I'll get into this over the next couple slides, but the EVs are really driving the new demand in the space, which is neat because it's a global base metal that all of a sudden has this new demand category. But then when you look at it, it's not just new commodity demand, it's also new commodity demand for the cleanest metals. So I think we're really well positioned to go after serving this new demand with Langmuir. We're in Canada, we draw on hydropower, and we start with very high grade, relatively sulfide ore. So as nickel production is also declining and there's a limited pipeline for new projects, we're really excited with the nickel fundamentals. So what I'll leave you with is there's 3 things we're going to do, and you'll hear this throughout the discussion today. But we're going to find more nickel at Langmuir. We're going to get our hands on more land across this area we refer to as the Shaw Dome, this geologic district south of Timmins. And then we're going to begin creating the clean nickel business, which is a theme that you'll keep hearing me repeat. Those are the 3 things we're focused in on. Let's talk a bit about nickel, though. A big part of why this is an exciting story now is the nickel market we're in. And again, it's a really neat situation where you've got a global base metal, which today is just a stainless steel story. So what I have here on the left is the global nickel demand. So last year, the vast majority of it was against stainless steel. just a sliver was going for the battery market. The forecast going forward is for good, strong growth on the stainless side for nickel, but growing more than 15% for battery. So as the battery category comes in, it's a whole new section of demand. And what it's doing on the right here is you look at the supply-demand balance, and most analysts are forecasting a shortfall going forward in terms of supply not keeping up with the demand growth. And again, the demand growth is really going to be driven by the new EVs coming on. And it's neat to think about how within this battery input, unlike, for example, lithium, the battery market is not currently the dominant user of the metal. So with nickel, again, right now it's a stainless steel story, but that's going to shift over the coming decades to become more and more based off of where the EV battery demand is. And again, with surging demand from the batteries, the current nickel supply chains just aren't in a position to be able to keep up. And again, when you look at the demand and the growth with the EV revolution, it really is staggering. Now you can pick your hockey stick in terms of what the forecasts are from different analysts, but if you look at the companies, Tesla, of course, we see them on the roads the most, and it's all over the news. But if you stack up all the other car companies, and this is really where the exciting stuff begins, when you begin looking at EVs beyond Tesla. So you've got new entrants, you've heard about Rivian with the recent IPO, but beyond that, it's as though all of the existing car companies are playing catch up, and their commitments to get into the EV space is quite impressive. And that's really what drives the hockey stick and is driving that demand growth we saw in the first slide. But if you get into it, it's not just typical demand. It's not just extra demand in a commodity. These new nickel buyers, they're really pushing the suppliers along. So partially because their own demand. So the EV companies, when you talk to them, they are feeling the pressure from people who are buying electric vehicles. Often it's for economic decisions, but also those environmental considerations, but someone is buying an electric vehicle. So the EV makers themselves are out front on trying to innovate and ensure that the battery makers that they're buying the batteries from are getting their metals from companies that have a focus on the footprint of their supply chains. So these raw materials are becoming a real priority, and you hear about it when you talk to the EV companies like we have. They're demanding that miners, they search for efficiencies in their production, and they move towards a carbon neutral product. So that's going to be a big focus for us, the clean nickel business. So the other thing they think about is it's really interesting when you look at how globally integrated the current nickel industry is, where in Ontario, for example, we have up to a quarter of the world's nickel sulfides in the Sudbury Basin, but almost no nickel, finished nickel, comes out the door in Ontario. It all bounces around the globe, being processed and further refined, because that's the way the current industry is set up. So when you talk to the EV companies, they're confused. That Tesla battery day that our industry loves talking about, all the nickel juniors are talking about how last summer in 2020, you had Elon Musk making calls for much more nickel to come online. That was very interesting, of course, but the thing that I really clung to from that presentation was when he did a little tirade on the current nickel business. And when he talked about how nuts it is to think about a nickel atom, if you focus on what that thing does, is it bounces around the world before it finally becomes nickel. So these are the sorts of demands that the new buyers, this new demand category coming on in nickel, are expecting that miners are able to begin addressing what they require. And it's not just going to be a function of them backing up the truck and taking delivery from the existing nickel producers. So footprint and clean nickel is going to be crucial. So let's talk a bit about my business. So we are focused on the Shaw Dome, and we're excited about the Shaw Dome because of where it is. So again, Timmins goes without saying, world-class mining camp. We've got a huge city, which is very short drive from where we're located. And it's a city that serves a lot of mines and advanced projects. So there's about 20 projects functioning all up around Timmins. And we love the fact that it's served by clean hydropower. So everything we do, which is electrified, is going to draw from clean hydropower. And that, of course, is going to feed into our clean nickel story. So there we are, south of Timmins, southeast of Timmins, the Langmuir property on the Shaw Dome. We have about 91 hectares of prospective geology. We have 30 kilometers of, now we talk about the komatiates. That's what our mineralization is located in. It's hosted in the komatiates. We have over 30 kilometers of favorable units. So we have a huge amount of potential exploration. And it's all very close to Timmins. So the Langmuir Project, this is an historic project that was discovered, specifically the W4 discovery, back in 2007. They did a technical report then, came out with an initial resource in 2010. Since EVNI acquired it earlier this year from Rogue, we've updated and come out with a new report by Carrickle Creek. Then, importantly, we completed new geophysics. So that's new technical work done across the project. That was all funded by the original acquisition that we did from Rogue. So EVNI paid $150,000 cash, 6.6 million shares, which makes today Rogue one of the largest shareholders of EVNI, and a future payment based on success and the size of a future resource of up to $5 million. The founders came to Rogue and did that transaction on the promise that they'd be able to deliver on at least $2 million of financing, and they did that in March, and that was when really EVNI was birthed. So we did those geophysics in May with the funding from that financing, and then we've advanced that further. So this summertime, while we were really in quiet mode, waiting to get our IPO pushed along with the OSC, we did over 4,000 meters of diamond drilling, and those assays are going to come out very soon. So we did all the work, and the lab did all the analysis. When the IPO came through last week, we paid the lab, and now we're about to get our results out into the market any day now. So we funded that with the IPO we did last week, where we closed on $5.4 million. About 80% of that was hard dollar, and about 20% came through in flow through. Now from here, we're going to be coming out with the assays from the work we did over the summer. We're going to continue doing some more drilling and met testing, and our game plan is to come out with an identified resource next year. So we've got some great news flow coming right out of the project, and that's really the first thing we're working on, trying to make sure there's more nickel mineralization continuing, and that's going to be door number one. How much nickel can we talk about on the Langmuir project? So W4 was the starter resource that we picked up with the initial project acquisition. Now that was over 22,000 meters of drilling that was done in run up to the 2010 resource report. So this summer, as I mentioned, over 4,000 meters was completed. And again, the assays are forthcoming on that. So we do know from that prior work and subsequent geophysics work that the mineralization subcrops to surface. And we have very limited overburden from surface at 0 to 20 meters. So it's excellent mineralization, which you see on the right there, comes just up to surface. So it's near surface, open pittable. And when we talk about the contact as well, and I'll get into that when we look at the trend, it's actually open down at depth as well. So there's a lot of mineralization there, and we know that it's open at depth. So this is the specific resource which we inherited with the project from 2010. So 15 million pounds of indicated nickel at 1% nickel. And again, I'm going to talk about grade a lot here because we're really excited about the grade that our project has with the starter resource, and also the grades in the area that we're at in the Shaw Dome. So we have a huge land package with huge exploration potential, and you see that the majority of ours is in that near surface open pit. Again, open at depth, we think there's more mineralization going down. And one of the things we're confirming now is up and down strike, whether the mineralization continues. So I mentioned the geophysics we ran. So before doing the drill program, we reprocessed and did new analysis, really with the better computing power from 2010. There's a bunch more stuff that lit up now, rerunning this analysis now. And this allowed us to define where those channel flows are. And by doing that, we were able to really begin to identify the komatiates, and we were able to review targets. Now, 21 targets came up. You see there on the map where the W4 is. And our high priority drilling, and this is the drilling that we'll be talking about any day now, high priority drilling that we did last summer was to test the mineralization going west and east, up and down the mineralization from the existing W4 resource. So Shaw Dome more broadly, so this is a zoom in on the map we showed before. That's our property there in the cream, so Langmuir. And you see W4 located with the red stars. That's where our initial 1%, 15 million pounds. Now down in this area, and you see Timmins in the top left corner. So we're southeast of the town of Timmins. And again, it's connected by a road, year-round road, all the way down, very easy access. All of our drillers live up in Timmins. There's been a lot of historic production on the Shaw Dome. And the really neat thing for me is the grade of that production. So you have properties that adjoin ours across the Shaw Dome, historically good high grade production. You see there to 1 3/4, 1 1/2, and you see additional resources as well. So there's a resource across the street at Hart with 1.5% nickel. So our starter resource is W4 down at 1%. We anticipate that there's even better mineralization of the sulfides across the Shaw Dome. That's really why we're excited about this. It's in the backyard of Timmins, and it's got great quality grade. So that's what we're really excited on the Shaw Dome to figure out what more there is. And if you compare the Shaw Dome to Western Australia and the Kambalda Dome, so another komatiite associated deposit, so Shaw Dome and the Kambalda Dome looks very similar geologically, and they have mined a huge amount of nickel out of the Kambalda Dome. So they've graded 3.1%, and they've brought out over 51 million tons. So again, the komatiite associated nickel sulfides look very similar to what we have on the Shaw Dome. So the mineralization in Western Australia on the Kambalda runs north-south. You see that on the right side. Our Shaw Dome runs east-west with the lenses, those black squiggly lines. You see how W4 is on the trend, and within our own property, we have, again, 30-kilometer of strike length to go look at. And I should say, for sense of perspective, the Kambalda Dome, the drawing on the right, which locates the 51 million tons of production over time down there, that's the same geographic area on the left. You see on a relatively small geographic footprint, you can have a massive amount of potential production with clustered deposits. So the Shaw Dome for us is exciting for a few reasons. One, that location, easy access to Timmins. It's exactly where you want to be developing a mining business. Second is grade. You've heard me talk about this. Our starter resource is at 1%, and there's even better historic production and deposits across the Shaw Dome. And the potential, we think that there's huge potential across our massive land package. We have 30 kilometers of strike, and we know that W4 is open at depth. So again, that is the stuff we're testing right now. And our first focus is trying to figure out how much more nickel we can think about on the Langmuir project. So team-wise, I've been talking for quite some time now. I mentioned that I've been in mining for the past 15 years or so, initially with Kinross Gold, and then I've been at junior companies since then. And again, prior to that, I was in private equity, and I began my career in financial markets down in New York. On our management team, we've got a great team who's got a bunch of experience. So Travis, my CFO, he's based in Vancouver. He used to be the CFO at Integra Gold prior to it being taken out by Eldorado. Very capable guy. Our real star is Paul Davis, my VP of Exploration. So Paul lived in Timmins for much of his career, and he is an expert on the komatiites. He did his master's specifically on the Shaw Dome and comparing it to the Kambalda, and he is very excited. He and his team of very experienced exploration geologists of getting in and trying to find out how much more nickel there is there. And then rounding out our management team is Mike Silver, who's my director of business development. He's a very capable, experienced banker in Toronto. My board has extensive experience in Northern Ontario. So first couple, Linda is based in Timmins, and she is an environmental consultant. We have worked with Linda for many years on permitting and really boots on the ground environmental stuff with mines. So we're excited to have Linda on our board, in addition to Michael Fox, who's a director who's based up near Thunder Bay. Michael used to be on the PDAC board with me. We were both elected and served together. He's a wonderful guy, knows the business very well, knows the region very well, and is very, very strong in his relationship with the regulators, both federal and provincial. Then we have Gadi. Gadi is a very capable, experienced guy, chair of our audit committee. He's an accountant by training. And then rounding out our group is Stephen Delaney, who is a Toronto-based investment banker and does a heck of a lot of advice for us at the capital markets. So if I get into the capitalization of the company, so we are trading roughly 50 cents. And if you look at how many shares we have outstanding, a little over 30 million, and the split there being the initial founders group is almost 1/3 of that. Then we have Rogue Resources sitting on 6.6 million. Now that block is very tightly tied up, and I'll get into that in the next slide. Then we have a block that came in through a March 2021 round into the private company, and then last week's IPO. So that's where we round out the shares outstanding at a little over 30, which has us at 15 million market cap. I'll show you in a couple slides how that compares to the industry. If I look at the 30 million shares, again, I mentioned tightly controlled, the 16.4 million. Now, this is the initial schedule. I list on the right here that 10% came up on listing last week, but we actually have escrows above and beyond that tying the hands of that group. So that block of ownership is sewn right up. Then we have the group that came in March of this year. And there's a lot of overlap between the March round and the IPO round, but 20% of that became available for trading last week. I think that was the initial pressure that we saw in the market. And we're working through that now. And I anticipate as we work through who came in on that first round, the March round, we'll begin marching the stock back up. And then free trading, the 7 million shares that we issued with the IPO last week. So if I compare our current valuation at 15 million to other plays that are out there in the nickel space. So there are a couple that are in Timmins. So on this slide, we compare against Class 1 and also Canada Nickel, two very popular nickel plays out of the Timmins camp. Canada Nickel has done a wonderful job telling their story. And if I was to compare our company to theirs, we have, now that they've done a recent land deal, a similar amount of land to work our way through, but we're really focused on much different mineralization. So our grade up at 1% is the sort of grade that is made into mines around the world. 0.26 is really a new thing. And you hear about that with Canada Nickel, with all the very interesting things they're doing to talk about a much larger volume play to be able to make that an economic mine. So we are more closely related to Class 1. I would say that our grades are the same. We have a much larger land package, and I'm very excited about our exploration potential versus theirs. But you see on this slide, that we are deeply undervalued when you compare us either in terms of the mineralization type we're going after, the grade specifically, or the size of the land package that we have. So just to round up here, I think that EVNI is a great opportunity to come in and play on the EV boom and do what people often refer to as sort of a pick and shovel style investment. This is a chance to come in at a deeply undervalued company, which is going to be able to take advantage of that huge new demand category with the electric vehicles coming in on nickel. So again, in this quote here, the world needs the nickel, the type of high grade, clean nickel that we intend to build EV nickel all around. And if you think about decarbonization as being the challenge of our lifetime, then we plan to be able to source the material that are going to help the EV companies grow and help address that challenge. So really, we're a play on decarbonization. We have an enormous land package, and we have the type of mineralization and specifically grade that has historically been turned into mines. So there's three things we're focused on right now. One is finding more nickel at Langmuir. Two is securing more land on the Shaw Dome. And three is beginning to put the pieces of the puzzle together on a clean nickel business. So there's a heck of a lot of work to do. We're really excited about it. We're in it now, and we're going to have news almost immediately, and we'll begin putting together the pieces of that puzzle. And that's what you're going to hear about from EV Nickel over the next 6 to 12 months. So Deb, that's my quick run through.
That's great. Thank you very much, Sean. For any audience participants, feel free to put any questions in the Q&A box. And I've got a couple for you, Sean. What would you say your biggest differentiator is versus some of the other projects out there?
Yeah, well, that's a good question. I think when you compare all of the early stage, especially projects, I think the fact that we have a starter resource with the grade that we do, and then more importantly, if you look across the area we're in, which is underexplored, we're in an area with the types of grades that historically have been turned into mines. We have historical production down on the Shaw Dome, and there's other deposits that are down there. And I'm really excited to figure out how much more of that we can find. And really, I think the grade that we start with is a differentiator for us.
Okay, perfect. And so you said that you've got 4,000 meters of drilling that you expect back from the labs in the next little while.
Yeah.
Do you have a timeline on that? Like within the next month, you would anticipate?
Yeah, within the next month, we'll be talking about it. And the fun, we did the drilling in the summer, right? So we really should have already had the assays in hand, but the delay of the IPO and the fact that the money came across last week, it was a function of us, paying the labs. So we will have that very soon. So the work's already been done, and we'll have the results definitely within the next month.
And is the drilling season year round?
Yeah, it is. Well, we did it in the summertime. It was a very wet summer. We intend to be back in the winter. The shoulders are rough. The freeze up is less rough than the thaw, but you can get in likely 9 to 10 months a year. And really, that was what my colleague Paul spent over 20 years of his career doing, was drilling as the nickel guy around the Timmins camp. So it's excellent drilling conditions, very close to town. It's exactly the kind of place you want to be finding metal in the ground.
And rig availability isn't a problem right now?
Well, yeah, that's more of a global thing, right? So we have access to rigs because we have relationships, and we have developed those over years. And more specifically, we've been paying this year for rigs. So we've secured the rigs we need for our planned projects. We're actually doing that in conjunction as well with our First Nations partners, which we'll talk a bit more about in the coming weeks and months. But we've had hands on rigs. Obviously, though, rigs are an issue. And then with rigs, you need labor. And the issue really, the squeeze is really on labor. We've had good luck till now, again, through relationships. And our future plans, for the most part, seem to be figured out in getting rigs and men back on those rigs.
How many meters do you anticipate to drill over the winter?
Yeah, we're putting that together now. So again, part of that is really seeing the final results of the 4,200 that we drilled. I anticipate we're going to be doing that again with our next phase 2 campaign. But really, we have this all through our prospectus, and it really is true. We need to get into the results back from the initial round to figure out how much we want to do. But my intention is that we're going to get at least 1, hopefully 2 rigs, and we're going to keep them there as long as we can, trying to find more and more nickel across the Shaw Dome.
And in terms of budget over the winter, what are you anticipating in terms of a dollar amount?
Yeah, I see us doing, again, it's dependent on the results from that phase 1, but we're going to be looking at more than $2 million on this next phase. So I'd like to think we're doubling our drilling from the 4,200 meters and doing at least that again. But again, we'll lay that all out when we've got our results from phase 1.
Got it. And how much cash do you have left? I know you had to pay for the lab results, et cetera. What's your cash on hand?
Pay for the lab results and the process.
Yeah.
So we brought in 5.4, and we're about 4.9 in cash.
Okay, thank you. And how deep are you drilling the results that you did in the summer?
Yeah, some of our holes were a few hundred meters, but really we're tighter than that. So the mineralization, you see the cut there. We're bottoming out the holes. I think it was 300 meters were our longest shots. But again, it's the mineralization is near surface, and this summertime drilling was to try to figure out up and down the immediate trend. So we weren't going for the long shots. We know it's open at depth, and that's possibly part of phase 2, is trying to figure out what's that next piece down. But really we were doing from surface shots to try to figure out if that mineralization like W4 continues to the west and to the east.
Okay, and do you anticipate your resource size will be large enough to be of interest to the majors? I know it's pretty early to talk about that, but maybe you can elaborate on what you think would be of interest to the majors down the road and how you plan to move the company towards some sort of transaction, or maybe you can talk about the overarching strategy.
Yeah. So our thing is we want to be there and try to become a clean nickel business. So we're not just poking holes to be able to wave our arms and attract a major and get a takeout. Our intention is to try to find mineralization and try to develop a business where we're actually making nickel. So that makes us a little different, and it's a totally different ballpark in terms of the financing to get through those stages. But that's really how we're trying to set the business up from the beginning. So our real play, I anticipate, is finding mineralization near surface like W4 and being able to piece together these near surface deposits where you get enough volume of ore where you can support regional processing. So I come at it from that side, which is how many more W4s can we find, and how much bigger can you make W4, but then how many more of them are there to piece together on the Shaw Dome a new nickel business with good high grade, where you're doing the things. And again, I'll talk more about this as we start putting more meat on the bones of the clean nickel story. But how can you do the things to be able to raise the grade, either through pre-processing sorting, for example, where you're using the hydroelectricity to try to raise the head grade of what you end up sending to the mill. But putting together a business like that is really our focus, to try to have, you know, the cleanest nickel coming out of our little operation, as opposed to poking holes everywhere to get the biggest possible resource number and then hopefully hand the keys off to some major who takes us out. So maybe that comes with luck on the drill bit, but from day one, we are trying to plan to build a clean nickel business. And those are the sorts of decisions that are driving us.
And when you talk about production levels for a small operation like that, do you have any ballpark estimates?
Well, you can, yeah, for example, if you had a 2,000 ton per day mill and you did the math on being able to feed that with some sort of ore, which has a head grade of between 3 and 4%, and using basic assumptions running through that, you know, relatively small mill at 2,000 tons per day, you could get yourself into the 40 to 60 million pound production a year. So that's small in the base metals business, but then you can sort of factor it up from there. So that's the domain you're in. If you're able to get yourself mineralization out of the ground of, let's say, 1 to 2%, and do some sort of X-ray sorting or other sort of localized to the deposit electrically powered sortation to lift the grade and feed a higher grade into a 2,000 ton per day mill. These are the sorts of things we're bouncing around. And that's really what we're building towards. And that's what we think the Shaw Dome, again, has tremendous mineralization across it with really good high quality grade, which allows you a lot of options when you're trying to put together a nickel business. If your grade out of the ground is between 1 and 2%, there's a lot of things you can do. It's not just let's try to get the highest possible volume, because that's what we need to make our grade make sense.
So you're thinking of some sort of hub and spokes type strategy with a centralized processing facility?
Yeah. We think that the mineralization could support that. And that's what has been done in the past. There have been processing plants. There's one currently permitted down in the Shaw Dome. There's another that's not yet decommissioned, but fallen into disrepair. And in the past, that's what they've done. They've drawn from localized deposits and they've produced metal. So that's pretty far down the path for us, but that's the thinking we're going through.
Sure. And in terms of, like, would you look to purchase one of the existing mills or build your own? And what would be the type of CapEx you'd look at for something of the size you're thinking?
Yeah, so that's back to what I mentioned before, but it's a different league in terms of the CapEx, and it's obviously naive for a junior to say they're going to step into that world of, you know, billion-dollar CapEx. So that's one of the reasons when I think about starting a nickel business, it's ratcheted down to a level which would be a more manageable CapEx size. But we're open to everything. There are existing processing permits in our area. We know them all and we're talking with them, and we'll figure out what makes sense for us, whether it's buying and then building bigger, or whether it's building from day one. So again, we think our key is find as much nickel in the ground as we can to make Langmuir as interesting with enough of these deposits that it could support a business. Secondly, try to get our hands on more land on the Shaw Dome and find even more deposits like we anticipate are at Langmuir. And then we'll start putting those pieces together, whether it's a buy or a build, we'll cross that bridge down the path.
And those other areas that you're looking at on the Shaw Dome, are those like held by other companies? Are they held by public companies, private companies? Do you stake them? Can you talk a little bit more about that?
Yeah, it's a real mixed bag. Well, actually a mixed bag between staked and private companies. There are no other public companies that are, as best we know, looking for nickel down on the Shaw Dome. So it's primarily split up across a number of different private companies and folks that have staked the ground. We know them all, we're in touch with all of them. And this really comes back to the fact that our management team more broadly has been working the Shaw Dome for a long, long time. So we know where the nickel is, we know who owns the ground. And it's those groups with whom we're talking to. And it's interesting because there are no other public companies that are down looking at the historic production areas of the Shaw Dome.
And then I had a question just going back to the CapEx. Are you willing to give us a ballpark number in terms of the smaller CapEx size?
No. So I can tell you what I'm going to do next, which is go drill and find more nickel. Yeah, plants are expensive, big numbers.
Yeah, I guess.
And it's CapEx is one thing, but it's also, and folks don't have their eyes open about this, maybe as much as I do because I've done it before, but permitting is the issue, right? You can lose your time on the clock, almost more importantly than having to go out and finance a big nut. So we will put together a business methodically. First, we're going to find the mineralization and secure the mineralization that could support a business, and then start putting those pieces of the puzzle together. I could, wave my arms and have some enormous CapEx number, but the thing is, even when that's backed up with a 43101 study, it's still just pie in the sky if you don't have the grade and the mineralization to support that sort of business.
Or the permits.
Yeah, or the permits, which that is the thing, in my experience, that's the thing that surprises investors the most, right? Because they're so focused on financing the dollars as opposed to these nebulous processes that stand in the way of companies spending those dollars. So yeah, we will be focused on that from day one as we put together the clean nickel business, having our eyes open to the steps required for permitting. And that's really as well much of the skill that I was looking for in forming the board for EV Nickel, where we wanted to bring in the expertise to ensure that we understood that stuff. So we're a little less Bay Street, we're a little more permitting in Northern Ontario with our board.
I think that's smart. Who are the First Nations of interest in the Shaw Dome? What IBA have you entered into or need to negotiate?
Yeah, so they're the same groups in the Shaw Dome as for the rest of the Timmins camp, with whom they have done, they're further down the path with the companies that are further down the path than us on development. So the same groups, frankly, that Canada Nickel has done deals with. We have been in touch with each of them. We're doing business with a couple of them. And at our stage for the drilling, we got sign-off agreement from each of the First Nations by doing the by our choice outreach to them, filling them in on the drill program, and we remain in very regular contact with each of the First Nations. So they'll be a part of the puzzle going forward. And that's a big part of why when I talk about developing up a clean nickel business, it's the sort of thing that is with, it's efficient and it has the highest possible grade, because grade is really a function of the void you're going to leave in the ground at its simplest, and then how much material is moving around. So if I could pull high grade ore out of the ground, then I could figure out some low impact way of upgrading that ore, then the thing that I have in my concept of developing the clean nickel business is more in line with those native communities and more broadly groups that are located in Northern Ontario, because it's the most efficient development you can do if you can focus in on the highest grade, and then each of the steps you take, you are doing them methodically to lift the grade and have the lowest possible impact with your development.
Makes sense. Do you employ any of the First Nations groups in the area, or is that part of your plan?
It's part of our plan. Yeah, it was. They've been involved and they've been offered involvement in each of the tenders for drilling. It's and we'll have news about that in the new year as well. First and foremost, every time we hire, it goes straight to the First Nations groups with whom we've met. I should say the First Nations and the Métis. But back to the question before about rigs, it's very interesting with the level of activity in Northern Ontario that the First Nations groups with whom we've been in contact are very busy because of there being so much activity. So we're absolutely giving them first say and involvement in all possible tenders. But the reality is it's a very competitive market they're participating in as well. So we intend to be open, transparent, and collaborative as we go through this thing. And among the first conversations we had when we first formed the company was with the First Nations, even before we truly formed up what our drill program looked like for this summer.
Great. I don't see any other audience questions. Is there anything you wanted to talk about today, Sean, that we didn't touch on?
No, that's it. My sense is I rambled a titch, but we are going to continue to add pieces to this story. So I appreciate having had this sort of first real run through after the IPO. And I look forward to just adding more and more to it. So what we're doing is we're going to be finding more nickel on the Langmuir property. You'll hear about that very soon as these assay results come out. Then I'm hoping we can get our hands on more land on the Shaw Dome, and then the clean nickel story, which has been a focus from the beginning, and we'll begin making more and more announcements about the steps we're taking down that path. So Deb, I just want to thank you for the opportunity and thank the investors for participating. And I look forward to, this is the beginning of a public story that I've been very excited about since earlier than the beginning of this year. And I hope to continue to visit this with the investors and show what we're doing as we go along.
I think you're going public at a really interesting time for nickel. It's had a big move recently. And, there's, as you alluded to, there's a scarcity of nickel plays, right? And nickel plays in safe jurisdictions that can mine in an ethically and safe way. So I think, it's exciting times for EV nickel. Before I let you go, I know you've listed a number of the catalysts for us to expect, but maybe you can just round them off so investors have them top of mind.
Yeah, so drill results right away for drilling that we did in the summertime, which frankly are overdue for us to see and for us to get out to the market. So those will be coming out very soon. In addition to, I could say, sort of pent up output from pent up activity, wherein we've filed our preliminary prospectus in May of this year. And we've been very active in the camp, not just spinning the drills. So on the land front, and I've alluded to in this conversation today, that we know who controls the land, and we're working on, as one of our key things we're focused on, getting our hands on more land. So there should be news on that, I would hope. And then clean nickel, which is going to be really better painting that picture and explaining what we mean by clean nickel and beginning to put those pieces together and explaining those to investors. So really we'll have catalysts and news flow, I anticipate, across all three of these things that we're focused on.
Right. Clean nickel for a green future, right?
Absolutely.
There you go. I even wore green for you, Sean. Well, thanks for taking the time. Thanks to the audience for participating. As always, if you have any other questions, feel free to reach out and I'll get those answered for you, and appreciate everyone's time.
Great. Thank you.